Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the fifth module for the CCI Clearance Preparedness Program. I will make this announcement short and sweet because by now you should know how to sign in and know about the attendance policy. As a reminder, you all have received calendar holds for the remaining modules. The next module will be July 10th from 1 to 2 p.m. And if you do have any questions, I do see somebody has a hand raised. If you can just put your question into the chat, or if you would prefer to email me, or unless this is to Dr. Berger specifically, I would just throw your question into the chat. But right now I'm going to turn this over to Dr. Eric Berger, and we're going to get started for today.
Thank you very much. So as Kendall mentioned, this is Module 5. And today we're going to talk about some of the rules, regulations, and directives governing cybersecurity in the federal government. Even though we're focusing on clearance preparedness in general, we are the Commonwealth Cyber Initiative. Many of you will be looking for jobs in the cyber field. Likewise, if you are interested in policy, there's an event run every year called Cyber 9/12, so the day after 9/11. And it's a simulation of a cyber attack on the United States. And this is the kind of stuff you'll need to know in order to successfully navigate in that simulation. But also it's things that hopefully will be useful for you with a career in government dealing with cyber. So again, as always, we've talked about the clearance process. That's a lot of what we're talking about. This today will be reminiscent of when we went over the regulations governing the clearance process. We're going to talk today about the regulations governing cyber, both in the public and private sector. And we did focus on drugs and other behaviors in our last meeting. And if we have extra time today and there's still questions, feel free to toss them in the Q&A. I may or may not be able to get to them. And likewise, next month is possibly the second most interesting one. Many people consider the drug one to be the most interesting. Next month, we will talk about social media. Again, a reminder about the Q&A box. Please feel free to put questions to me in the Q&A. And if it's directly like administrative, you can also use the chat to send to Kendall. As always, especially as we are talking about the law, talking about laws, regulations, authorities, I am again not giving legal advice. When you do get a job in the government, the Office of General Counsel at your agency or department will be your friend, and they will be happy to help you with specific advice. So it is a big universe of departments and agencies. There are a lot of agencies involved with cyber. And as well, components of the White House, components of the Department of Defense, certainly a lot going on, like with the FBI, but who are you going to call? The most important one is Ghostbusters. A lot of people you can call. So how do you know who is responsible for what? Well, there are a number of federal cybersecurity regulations. Many of us are familiar with HIPAA, and that was focused on healthcare and a number of regulations and guidance around protecting health information. And the target there is actually the private sector. There is the Information Technology Management Reform Act, part of the NDAA. And this one, just as HIPAA is targeting the private sector, this is targeting the public sector, IT architectures, how systems are bought. And it started OMB Circular A130. And a bunch of circulars followed after that. We're going to talk about that in a moment. So Congress addressed healthcare with HIPAA. They also addressed financial services with the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act, which had a number of requirements around cyber for the financial services sector. And then kind of the big one was FISMA, the Financial Information Security Management Act of 2002. And this is where we get quite a lot of standards and requirements for federal civilian agencies in the cyber realm. Just as we went from healthcare to financial services, civilian, of course, needs its partner in defense, the National Defense Authorization Act. I have here an excerpt from something I wrote, which is the Secure 5G and Beyond Act, which was securing 5G and beyond. And one reason I put this up here is you'll notice that the NDAA goes beyond the Department of Defense, because this is talking about 5G networks effectively in general. So let's talk about FISMA. So this is Title III of the E-Government Act of 2002, which, by the way, had a lot of important things to enable e-commerce. This is the act that basically said a digital signature is legally as binding as what we call a wet signature, the signature you write with a pen. And one of the things is it allocated authorities and says that the director of the Office of Management and Budget oversees civilian agency security implementation. Now, this is the way government typically works. You know, it's the director of OMB. Is the director of OMB a cyber person? No, they're typically an accountant, but they've got the responsibility. So they have people in the Office of Management and Budget who oversees civilian security. In particular, there's a CIO in the Office of Management and Budget who's kind of like one of the Uber CIOs. But again, that delegation then further flows down to the agency chief information security officers. Because let's face it, they're the cyber experts, and they are experts in their agency. The Office of Management and Budget also convenes a council of federal CIOs, federal chief information officers. So that's the civilian side. On the defense side, the Secretary of Defense oversees national security systems. Of course, they typically delegate to the DoD CIO, who delegates it to the DoD CISO. They oversee all the national security systems with the exception of a carve-out for the CIA. The E-Government Act basically says which agencies are responsible for what privacy and security of which data. I'm going to talk about that kind of in the middle of today. And the E-Government Act, Chapter 37, actually introduced something very new, something for those of you who may be later in their career. There's an act called the Intergovernmental Personnel Act, or IPA. This was an act that enabled people, for example, from the FBI to go spend some time at DHS, or DoD to spend time at like DOE, or vice versa. And the E-Government Act of 2002 recognized, you know, the civilian sector knows an awful lot about cybersecurity and knows an awful lot about electronic commerce. So Chapter 37 is what enabled IPAs to and from the private sector. So after you do your government service, or maybe you're doing it right now, working for a contractor, getting a clearance, you might consider actually taking a formal role in government. IPAs are short-term. By law, they cannot be more than 4 years, but it's a great way of getting experience on the federal side as a federal employee. And also, it's good experience for you to bring back to the private sector to truly understand the challenges faced in the public sector. So what is a national security system? Remember, there was that carve out that DoD is responsible for national security systems. So these are systems, and this includes, and it was kind of prescient in 2002, because voice over IP was just kind of a thing. But now we really have kind of the merging of information systems and telecommunication systems. So basically, if you're using it for intelligence activities, pretty obvious, it's national security. Cryptologic activities, on the one hand, kind of a holdover from when we considered cryptography to be a munition, but you can still imagine that there are some cryptologic activities related to national security that would make that system into a national security system. Clearly, a system that's dealing with the command and control of military forces is a national security system. If it's a weapon, really hope that's a national security system. And then basically there's a catch-all, anything that's required for, and directly required for the fulfillment of military or intelligence systems. So this is section 2A, there is a 2B, because since 2A15, that kind of catch-all phrase, you could say, well, someone in the infantry needs to be paid. And so if they're an infantry deployed, that's clearly, military mission, but, it specifically excludes payroll, finance, logistics, and personnel. Those are not national security systems, even if it's in support of the national security mission. And then, of course, the president decides how to protect this. So in law, what about on the civilian side? Again, Office of Management and Budget. And basically, we have an expert agency for standards. It's NIST, National Institute for Science, Standards and Technology. And so the law basically says, yes, OMB is responsible for oversight, but again, they're accountants, they're lawyers, they're not cyber experts. So they defer to NIST to create guidelines, and OMB enforces them, and that's where we get Circular A130, managing information as a strategic resource. And it is continually updated. In fact, I believe it's been updated again to reference the cybersecurity framework. So where does this come from? So NIST is directed to create a computer standards program. And so basically for the non-national security systems, basically dividing things out based on risk. Your veterans healthcare records management system is probably a higher security system because it's got all of that personal information and healthcare information, probably higher security system than a computer system that is tracking historical weather at a particular airport. We do want to know the integrity of that because that helps us create models for weather prediction. But like we talk about the distinction between confidential, unclassified information, secret information, top secret information, similar risk analysis for how we protect computer systems. Uh, Part of these guidelines is what to do when you detect a security incident. Now, some of this is historical, and some of this is highly relevant. Historically, pretty much the only cryptographers in government were at the NSA. That has changed. NIST now has a lot of really good cryptographers. But again, we don't want to replicate effort. And so the updated law basically says not NSA shall do all crypto. It says NIST will work with NSA to develop both identifying national security systems and what is a national security system. You may have heard of the NIST cybersecurity framework. This was established by Executive Order 13636 and the Cybersecurity Enhancement Act of 2014. And the idea was to create a voluntary framework that would reduce cyber risks to critical infrastructure. And there was a reason why critical infrastructure was targeted. Again, today's talk is about authorities, where the federal government has the mandate and legal ability to act. And critical infrastructure through a number of laws and executive orders is where the federal government has the authorities to act. It was created as a voluntary framework, although we all knew it would become mandatory for certain infrastructure segments. But also it was done with the hope that the framework would spill over into the rest of the private sector, that best practices and ways of securing a federal information system, like the information system for the IRS, which handles a lot of money and people's identity. Oh, look, the financial services industry needs to protect people's identity and a lot of money. So, in fact, the spillover realistically, when this was developed, was that the financial services sector would help teach the IRS. So the first version of the cybersecurity framework was released in 2014. The first revision to that was 2018, with the recognition that these systems are not in a vacuum, that there's a supply chain, that we need to know, where does our software come from? Where do our systems come from? It also added vulnerability disclosure programs. We want to encourage the white hat hackers to come forward and help us secure our systems. And then with that framework, there were various profiles. So the framework was generic. Here is how you secure pretty much any system. Well, if you think about it, position, navigation, and timing has specific needs. And by the way, PNT typically doesn't deal with individuals' identity. So there are things that do and don't apply. Enterprise resource management, electronic health records, manufacturing. So these all got NIST worked on specific profiles, quite often through the National Cybersecurity Center of Excellence that NIST runs, which is a public-private partnership. So a lot of input from industry. And again, this was the basis for a lot of private sector cybersecurity initiatives. The idea was that in the cyber realm, there was no kind of like legal definition what was due care, which is kind of the legal standard for companies. If you think about it, if you leave your door open and your wallet on the threshold, and someone comes by and steals your wallet, they're still stealing, but you're not going to get much sympathy. Whereas if you lock your door and put your wallet in a safe, um, you've taken due care. And for that matter, if you have laser guided intrusion detection and all that to protect your wallet, that's probably overkill. And the cybersecurity framework, you can think of it in the cyber realm, kind of worked on setting, kind of this is the baseline, this is the level of due care. Cybersecurity Framework 2.0 recently came out. It's still a NIST product, but we kind of dropped the NIST part of it. First of all, since the cybersecurity framework has been out for a decade, people know it's a NIST product, so we don't need to brand it. It explicitly goes beyond critical infrastructure segments. Now, again, we're talking about authorities. The federal government can't make the private sector adopt it. And insurance companies adopt it. And insurance companies tell private sector companies, tell us about your compliance with the cybersecurity framework. And by the way, if you're not compliant, we won't insure you, or we'll charge you a lot more. So that's a way it flows into the private sector. It also goes beyond US borders. This is now an international standard. And what was added, some references to other NIST frameworks. There's a framework for privacy, a framework for cybersecurity workforce, which is again being refreshed right now. There's a framework for secure software development. So this revision of the framework makes it easier to tie all of those different disparate frameworks together. Now you might be thinking, wow, this must be a heavy book. Well, this, Cybersecurity Framework 2.0 is much, much longer than 1.0. 1.0 was 8 pages. And 2.0 is 14 pages. So there's actually not that much there. It's pretty much do good. And here's what we mean by do good. Then we have appendices that are tens of pages, upwards of 100 pages long, that say, well, when the framework says you should have leadership buy-in, it then goes on for like 3 pages of like, the CEO is involved with getting regular cybersecurity supporting, and the CFO is paying for cybersecurity, and your board of directors gets regular briefings. So it's deceptively short because when you take in the appendices and again, those sector specific supplemental documents, it can be upwards of 100 pages. So we talk about standards, and NIST is the federal government's standards making agency. And by law, NIST must consult with the Office of Management and Budget, with DoD, Department of Energy, the General Accountability Office, DHS, and NSA. Basically, again, Congress does not want duplicative efforts in developing standards. So in law, they put it in that they have to coordinate. The other is, and like why, if DoD does not have oversight of civilian systems, are they involved? And it's basically to ensure the civilian standards complement the national security standards. And again, for 2 reasons. One is there's a lot of expertise, as I mentioned at the NSA, on cryptography as an example. But there's also, it's a network of networks today. A vulnerability in civilian systems could result in attacks on our national security systems. So it's an interrelated, integrated network of networks. So NIST wrote a standard. Are we done? And the answer is no, it's ongoing. As you saw in the past 10 years, we've had 3 minor versions and 1 major revision of the framework. But NIST also works with helping agencies comply with the framework. And How can they detect and handle incidents and help with developing policies? Again, that's coordination with OMB because OMB is responsible for that oversight. If you're thinking of places to work, NIST is a place to work because they're always looking at what are the nature and extent of vulnerabilities? For example, NIST manages, you may have heard of the CVE database, the common vulnerabilities. Also, they're always researching how can we do information security more cost effectively. What's the best way of deploying InfoSec? What's getting in the way? And by the way, since it's started out as the Measurement Bureau, how do we measure how well the federal government is deploying information security, which again, hopefully spills into the private sector? So back to who are you going to call? There is the Federal Information Security Incident Center. The law is codified in Title 44, Section 3546. And that established US CERT, the United States Computer Emergency Readiness Team. And so now the question is, depending on who you are, says whether you're calling US CERT, which is administered by CISA, which is a component of DHS. Basically, if you're critical infrastructure, and there are 21 critical infrastructure sectors. So this would be like power, telecommunications, energy, water, financial services, information technology. So information technology, clearly if your Oracle database goes down, I wouldn't say no one cares, but it's not necessarily a federal incident. But if the domain name system goes down, which means you can't get to www.google.com or darpa.mil, that is critical infrastructure. So if it's in that sphere of the private sector, you call US CERT. For everyone else, the rest of the private sector, you call CERT CC. Again, CERT being the Computer Emergency Response Team, but CC is a coordination center. That's been around since the 1980s, and it's both run by the Carnegie Mellon University Software Engineering Institute, which is a federally funded research and development center. Presidential Policy Directive number 41, titled United States Cyber Incident Coordination. The private sector was complaining that, they would call CERT CC and say, hey, I've been hacked. This is what's happened. And they go, great. Have you called the FBI? No. And it's like, all right, we'll go call the FBI. So they call the FBI and the FBI says, oh, great. Well, can you tell us all about it? And the private sector said, well, we just told CERT CC all about it. They're like, well, sorry, we're not allowed to talk to them. Tell us about it. And then they might say, hey, have you talked to CISA about it? No, they call CISA. And then CISA says, well, tell us all about the hack. Well, we've just told CERT CC and we've told FBI. Well, sorry, we can't. So this presidential policy directive said, we're going to have coordinated federal response to an incident, since most are either organized crime or state actors. The FBI is the lead agency. Now, what created this was the SolarWinds incident. This was a supply chain attack. SolarWinds was used by many federal and civilian enterprises. So in dealing with this incident, FBI system, the ODNI created a group, a kind of a working group. If you look up like the Washington Post, if you read things about SolarWinds, they'll talk about, and the National Security Council met over the weekend. Well, That's the group that met. And one of the results, kind of the after action, was, hey, let's create some guidelines from CISA. So they directed CISA, what should the private sector be looking for, and try to figure out how bad is that attack in a circumstance. And then CISA can basically say, hey, what do we do? And if you look, CISA will publish, hey, we've noticed this kind of an attack. This is what to look for. This is what you should do. If there's a criminal investigation, because it's like maybe organized crime, that's led by the FBI, partly because they want to collect evidence. They want to put these people away so they don't do it again. Sometimes it's a nation state actor. So that's where ODNI, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, brings the intelligence community's resources to bear. Because there's some things they can do that the FBI cannot do. We're going to talk about that a little bit later. But again, the lead here is FBI, because what had happened before PPD 41 was, the different agencies would either take the lead, or worse, each agency assumed someone else was taking the lead. So critical infrastructure, it's private, but regulated. Here's kind of a bit of history. One thing I will point out is back in the Clinton administration, PPD 63 enumerated what those sectors were, as well as who the responsible agency would be. So the Treasury Department, not a surprise, manages banking and finance. Department of Transportation manages aviation. Department of Energy manages energy. So that all kind of makes sense. It also created this new entity called an Information Sharing and Analysis Center, or an ISAC. And that's where the federal government created a safe space. And part of that, we are a nation of laws. So if I have information on an attack on Virginia Tech, and I go to share that with George Mason, but I don't tell Old Dominion, that's kind of collusion. It's actually a form of antitrust. So this was a way of getting all, and there is Research and Education Network, ISAC. There is actually an ISAC for all the academic institutions, because we are always under attack. And it would allow, because especially in academia, we freely share. But you can imagine in financial services, they're regularly concerned about antitrust. And so it created a legal framework where they could legally share information with each other. The Trump administration, Executive Order 13800. So it basically, every administration says, yeah, what they were doing, but we do more. One was we had just suffered the Mirai botnet. And so it directed that, we need to, and in particular NIST, needed to lead an analysis of botnets in the botnet report. Worked a lot with the FCC on creating that. Transparency in the private sector. So leaning on the authorities given by Sarbanes-Oxley and Gramm-Leach-Bliley. In the financial services sector, a lot more transparency, and that's where you get a lot of the breach notification from. The Biden administration and Executive Order 14028 increased threat intelligence sharing. And if any of you are looking for graduate work in intelligence sharing, come on over. It explicitly called out directing agencies to move to a zero trust architecture. For those of you on kind of the programming side of and the systems analysis side of cyber, these are technologies and architectures where we basically assume everybody is compromised. And NIST takes the lead on that. Moving systems to the cloud when possible, OMB taking the lead on that. And looking at improving cyber threat analytics. How do I know that I'm under attack? How do I know I'm safe? And that's, in the realm of all agencies. There's a program called FedRAMP, which certifies cloud providers. So really encourage agencies to leverage that certification. Software supply chain metrics. Metrology, measurement, that's NIST. The software bill of materials, initially developed at NIST and then moved to NTIA for deployment. The person who developed it literally moved agencies. Minimum test standards. How do I know my sort of red teaming, my systems are good? Again, NIST, because that's civil and is federal. The NSA, since they basically half of their day job is breaking into systems, they protect DoD. They did some directives on consumer labeling, working with NIST and the Federal Trade Commission to have some cyber nutrition label on products, particularly Internet of Things products. Creating a cyber safety review board. Basically, the after actions. The first one was SolarWinds, but making it more formal, as well as directing CISA to create a incident response playbook. So basically, instead of, wow, I've been attacked with this kind of attack, what do I do? You go, I've been attacked with this kind of attack. Oh, this is what people before me did to remediate the situation. So to create more resiliency in federal agencies and hopefully the economy of the United States. One result of the Cyberspace Solarian Commission, this was a blue ribbon bipartisan panel, a lot of retired members of Congress, flag officers from DoD, from CEOs of major cybersecurity and cloud providers and enterprise software, worked together and said, this is what the federal government should do. One of the pieces of advice was create a national cyber director. And this is the principal advisor to the president on cybersecurity policy and strategy, cybersecurity engagement, and not just in the federal government, but with industry and internationally. I just realized this is a little out of date because Chris has passed the baton and he did actually eventually get a budget. So with all of that talking about law, is this easy and obvious? And so what we'll do is look at the Department of Defense. This is an eye chart. Let's get the pen going here. You see this URL. This gets updated regularly. In fact, I just checked. This is the update as of May of this year. Now, this is 4.5 weeks old, hot off the press. Why? Because Congress passes laws. Different agencies enact regulations. So these are the laws and regulations that apply to specifically the Department of Defense information networks, but these authorities pass everywhere. So where are the authorities? You'll find that here. Again, that's, I think, at 2-point font. So let's blow that up to almost legible font. You see the larger, or the table here. These are the authorities. So this is what part of the code gives authorities to what part of the government. So you see Title 10, military operations. Title 50, that's the intelligence community. Title 18, which is elsewhere. That's the criminal code. You see here executive orders, um, presidential policy directives. By the way, notice, remember we talked about NIST. And DoD obviously adopts NIST as well. No reason to have the DoD standard for advanced encryption. It is just AES. So, and again, this becomes important, like for that Cyber 912. Do we call NSA? Do we call CISA? Do we call the FBI? This chart answers that. By the way, it's a really cool chart, that PDF. All of these squares or rectangles are clickable. When you click on Title 50 of the US Code, it'll pull up section 3002. It brings you right there. Pretty cool and useful chart. So there's an in-between, right? So we've got federal civilian systems, which are typically not classified. And then we have military systems, which typically are classified. And by the way, civilian agencies may have some classified systems as well. So we want to share classified information. One of the results of September 11th is we wanted to make it easier to share classified information so analysts can get a complete picture. It did take 10 years, but Executive Order 13587 talked about we need to share more, but we need to do it responsibly and securely. The other bit is this one. And again, this is why you all are hopefully in line to get a clearance, because the largest threat to our national security systems, for that matter, the largest threat to just this payroll system, Office of Management and Budget, is insider threat. And then this one here, yes, everything you do that traverses a federal network is going to get logged. There is an agency, again, another place that could be a cool place to work, called DISA, the Defense Information Systems Agency. On the one hand, I like to think of DISA as like Google Apps plus Comcast plus Verizon for the DoD, meaning DoD, instead of going to purchase cloud infrastructure from Google, DISA will do a blanket contract, and DoD can contract with DISA, or the different, like the Army or the Navy, can contract with DISA. About 75% of DISA's budget is cost recovery, doing kind of that pass-through of Google Apps and Amazon Web Services and Oracle Cloud. But 25% of their budget is on broad services. So doing research on, again, securing, enterprise applications. So like, how do we use Microsoft Office? What are the security standards? How do we configure people's PCs? And of course, just like NIST, how can we be more efficient? How can we save money by having this kind of centralized contracting mechanism? So talk about, kind of intelligence community breaches and DoD. What about crime? Well, the National Security Policy Directive and the Homeland Security Policy Directive, it's actually the same one, created a National Cyber Joint Task Force. We talked about that earlier. CIA, NSA, US Secret Service, led by the FBI. Presidential Policy Directive 41 actually set up a lot of stuff. One of the things it set up was incident coordination and the creation of the Internet Crime Complaint Center, IC3. If you go to ic3.gov, you can submit I've been hacked, I've been ransomwared, I'm a victim of fraud. So those are individual complaints of the public. And it's where, the FBI to follow up on. The 2017 cybersecurity strategy from the White House was looking to improve attribution. Who is the source of this attack, whether it's organized crime, more especially if it's a nation state. And the idea for that better attribution is so that we can hold those people accountable and determine what response we want to do, which can range from, we know we've been hacked or someone's trying to hack us, but we're not going to give them the gratitude of being recognized, all the way through to kinetic responses. The United States has a lot through at its disposal. It also directed the government to enhance tools and expertise. 2018 cybersecurity strategy was focusing on protecting networks, having more innovation in cyber, and also more of a theme of that administration was deterrence. So that's crime. Of course, DoD is different. We had IC3 for civilians reporting crimes. There is the DC3, the Department of Defense Cybercrime Center, for service members who are victims of crime. DC3 does forensics, and again, that would be on request from the Judge Advocate Generals, basically the lawyers, as well as different departments. So therefore, they're building tools. Again, this could be a cool place to work. They manage the Defense Industrial Base information sharing environment. A lot of interesting stuff going there. And to not duplicate work, they work with and consult with the FBI on investigations and on tools. Didn't mention it. FBI, another cool place to work. A lot of tools and interesting forensic analysis going on there. So, in fact, half of this is wrong or about to be outdated. I already had my slide on Chris Inglis as being outdated. And that is the preparation for you to understand the cyber authorities. Again, it's tangentially relevant to your clearance process. I'm confident that many of you will get your clearances. Part of having a clearance is paying meticulous attention to the law, and that's why we want you to be aware of all of these authorities. As it happens, I have the pointer right up for our next clearance preparedness program. Much less on the admittedly dry legal analysis of who does what in the federal government relating to cyber. This time, we're going to talk about many best practices. Even if you decide that a clearance is not for you, hopefully some of the things we'll talk about, besides being much more interesting than the dry legal situation for cyber, hopefully these tips and tricks can protect you from being the victim of a hack or impersonation or anything like that. So with that, we will open it to questions. So any questions from the audience, other than I saw there were a bunch of logistical questions about getting credit for today. But any other questions? Given that I'm not hearing anything, I have no problem ending a little earlier. But again, I will be here for a little bit. Kendall, oh, great. so we've got a question, what determines the FBI to be the lead on some of the incident responses? And basically, unless there's like a direct attack on a national security system, which, by the way, SolarWinds was not. SolarWinds was an infrastructure attack kind of on everyone. Then the FBI is always the lead. Now, just as the head of the Office of Management and Budget is responsible for all cybersecurity in the federal government, and clearly that individual is not the actual person responsible. Same thing here. The FBI will always be the lead, but especially if it turns out that it's more of a national security system thing, the FBI is going to just say, all right, NSA, thank you for being here. You guys run with it. Let's see, we have another question. Well, actually, yes. So since it is, and I'm having trouble typing, we had a question of where does CISA fall in the security category? And I was actually hoping, well, as a security agent, thank you. So CISA is in fact the lead agency for cybersecurity, in a sense, full stop. However, as we saw in that executive order going back to 1998, they pair with other agencies, and it depends on the infrastructure sector. So they're always involved. But if it's aviation, Department of Transportation leads, CISA supports. In information technology, CISA leads. In financial services, the Treasury leads with CISA support. So CISA is kind of always there, but again, it's always there for either federal, civilian, or private sector. Again, it's the NSA for the national security systems. So that's a good question. There are, so there are two questions that are not relevant, but I'll address them anyway. Will certain government jobs help you get a clearance? Or should I wait to start applying until I have one? So that's actually really easy to answer. You cannot get a clearance until you have a job that requires a clearance. That was covered in the first lecture, but I'll happy to reiterate it. And likewise, what kind of cybersecurity certifications will help you get a clearance? Well, the cybersecurity certifications that help you get a job that requires a clearance is going to be the one that will help you get a clearance. Many jobs require CISSP, ISC squared are kind of the big ones that you get. But again, it goes back to that whatever helps you get that job that requires a clearance will be the one that will get a clearance. We've got another question that I'm going to write down and look into it. And the question is, and again, remember I said insider threat is the #1 threat. And so the question is, and I'll modify it a little and then get to the whole thing. And it's, so what if, there's a senior official, which is kind of defined by, where you are in the senior executive service, or, basically GS 15 or above, or a very senior official. Those are cabinet secretaries. chair of the Joint Chief of Staff. Those are very senior officials. What happens if they have staff with security clearances, but they're mishandling information? And that is FBI. But then what if it's like Joint Chiefs or ODNI? Would that be NSA? And I'm not sure. Again, CIA, remember, mishandling information, especially if we're talking classified information, is a federal offense. It's a criminal offense. So at the end of the day, it's the FBI that's going to prosecute the individual who's mishandling information. And yes, when you get your clearance, you will spend a lot of time in training learning about handling the information, and a thing that's repeated over and over and over again: whistleblower, good. We want to shine light on illegal activities. We want to shine light on waste, fraud, and abuse. So whistleblower, good. Leaker, bad. And a lot of emphasis. You might think you're whistleblowing, but if you're not doing it through proper agency channels, and remember, OMB, independent of your agency, you can call them too. But if you're saying, oh, I'm going to be a whistleblower, I'm going to blow the whistle on this, what I think is legal activity, by giving it to the Washington Post, that's a leak. But that's a good question. The other one is, what if it's the president, and we are right now going to find out? That's kind of going to be up to the courts. Someone's asking about TikTok and TikTok ban. Absolutely on for next month. So if I don't answer that, definitely bring that up again next month. Any other questions? I would offer to people, if you see messages in the webinar chat, you might want to click on that to see if I'm not sending you a message, just to see if you're awake. But other than that, I think we're right at time. So Kendall, I will pass it back to you for your obligatory reminders and all that.
Great, thank you, Dr. Berger, and thank you all for joining us today. I'm just going to say one thing before we close out, other than thank you all for joining us. I just have noticed that there are a lot of questions when you all are signing in about dialing in versus just going through your phone. That's two separate things. If you're dialing in and you're using the phone number that is associated with the Zoom, that's dialing in. If you're just using your phone to watch the module, we capture your first and last name. So please don't worry about that. You guys are all set. I received all of your first and last names. I even checked the participant list and I see nothing but first and last names. So we're good to go. Other than that, enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll see you guys in July. Thank you.
Thank you.